Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Lead Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm PJ, along with my co-host, Matthew Shiles. So, Matt, I know we've already, episodes ago, we've talked about the difference between Matt and Matthew.
Yes.
So when you're in trouble...
Yeah, it's Matthew William.
Ooh, I don't think I knew that one.
It's really by generation. Most people call me Matt.
Yeah.
But, you know, Pastor Gus and others will call me Matthew, and that is totally fine.
It's totally fine.
Yes.
Well, he is the co-host of Extra Takes, and so, hey, thanks so much for engaging with us. Like, we just really do love this. This is a highlight of our week, to look back at the previous message and to explore it and go a little bit deeper, to talk about different elements. And Matt does such a great job of putting together the questions and the framework every single week. So I'll hand it off to you and let you run with it.
Sounds great. Yeah, it's so much fun and such a joy to interact with a lot of you in the foyer, through text, through email, about questions you have, and it really is just another way for us to engage deeper in the content. So let's get going. So this week was March 9th and 10th, and we're in our Empowered series, Lessons in Mission, and this is Acts 16. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a part 1 and part 2. So we're really going to dig deep into going through these 4 lessons from the Apostle Paul. So let's start with the main point. The main point is lessons enhance our understanding and, if enacted, make us more effective in our mission. And it is interesting to even think about that, because it kind of begs the question, well, does it even matter if we're more effective in our mission? And that can kind of be a heart question of all of us being on mission.
Well, so we were talking about this earlier, where like the previous week, when we're talking about Paul and Barnabas and their split, and kind of applying it more to the realm of our jobs and working within a department or division or a team or leading, and then even John Mark. I think everybody could resonate with John Mark about rocky seasons, rocky starts, having those rocks, and then still being able to rock it, and then because people are like, yes, I've experienced that, and yes, I wish my leader would lead, like whatever it may be. And then you get into this one and you're like, well, not really interested in it. Like, what does this really have to do with my life? And here's the sad reality. The sad reality is the reason why many Christians think that way is because the church has done a poor job communicating God's mission. Because a lot of times the church, and this is a form of contextualization, when you contextualize ministry and mission only to the individual, once the individual is reached, they don't see themselves as part of the bigger life of the church.
Yeah.
And so it is such a shame. It is such a shame. It is a detriment to the overall mission of God when all you do is focus on individuals and making sure that you're touching, in some sense, the individual's life and repertoire of what they want, versus letting them come into the mission of God and understand that they truly are a participant. That if God has radically saved them in Jesus, then by your very now nature that Jesus has put in you, his nature in you, then you would care about these things. Yeah. But the church, but again, by and large, and this is part of the sad reality and the sad state of most churches, is that when you teach a message on mission, 80% of the people don't care about it.
Yeah, it's something we really have to push against, to say, hey, this doesn't apply to me. This is for the professionals. You went so far to say, is if you are a child of the King, you need a mission lesson.
You do need you do, but if you went back, and this is why it's so important to teach the Bible, because because you deal with the text. Now, here's
like whatever comes up as we're going through Acts, whatever comes up, you get to do.
But how did I teach on Paul and Barnabas though? It was in the context of mission. that even in the context there with Paul and Barnabas, I wanted to make sure that it was clear that this wasn't a church split issue.
Yeah.
That they're not splitting churches, and they are splitting around a strategy on mission. Now, even then, I still was drilling down on mission. Now, how did I apply it? Well, yeah, I applied it from the realm of leadership and organizational leadership and working in departments and stuff like that.
Right.
But I was still trying to be as true to the text as I possibly could, but in a way that was contextual and relevant to where people might be.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, when you launch into a lesson on like mission, you do have a lot of people. Well, how does this, how does it resonate with me? Like I barely can keep my head above water. I'm barely surviving that life, and I hope that even at the last point, people kind of understood that even if you barely can keep your head above water, like even in that suffering, God can use you on mission. So,
Amen.
And we'll get to that. But now, so I hope and pray that people see, that our people see, that we want to be true to the text, and that the reason why the church has at least been conditioned not to want to listen to these is because the church has now kind of cultivated basically a population of people in the church that are consumer-oriented. What are you going to do for me? Versus how is God going to use me to actually do for others?
Yeah, and what we've seen and what I'm hearing is our commitment as a church is to not just buy into that consumeristic mindset, and then you as the listener and viewer, I mean, that's what you're doing by consuming extra takes. Is you're not just sitting back and being passive, but you're being active and you are digging in. So it's exciting to see the bigger purpose of why is it important for us to understand and be passionate about this, and not just leave it to the quote professionals.
Yeah. And then, wanting to make sure I drill down too on this idea of ministry and mission, because you'll hear me use those terms, ministry and mission.
Okay.
And I want every believer to love church ministry and church mission. So if you think about it this way, ministry is who we are. Like we're ministers. Every member of Jesus's body is a minister. Now, this idea of minister is just someone who serves, a servant. So ministry is who we are and what we do within the body, is that we serve, we minister to one another. And so within the realm of Northland, you can serve in ways of connecting, of cultivating, of caring, and even being commissioned that you're going to serve the body that way. And then mission is who we are and what we do within the world, or what we do to or towards the world. So mission is this moving outward. Ministry is what happens in. Now, if you were here when we talked about commission in our Engage series, we talked about a centripetal and a centrifugal force.
Yeah.
The centripetal is the drawing in. The centrifugal is the going out.
Yeah.
So ministry, what we do within the body, should be the attractive means that actually when the world is brought in, they go, oh my gosh, look at how you serve one another.
Yeah.
Look at how you care for one another. Oh, my Lanta.
Yep.
There's no other organization. There's no other sphere of society that cares for the people the way you care for one another. That is the ministry of the church. Now, the mission of the church is this centrifugal. It's this going out and sharing and showing the good news. And so what we learn here in Acts 16 is this going out. Like, how do you go out? And so you're going to go out and you're going to contextualize. You're going to go out, and many times you will be, prompted by a God-given vision to go out to a certain group of people, to a certain place. Like, so you're going to have this vision. Abraham had that vision. Go, and I'll show you. Then you're going to have this evangelism where you are going to share and in some sense, in some ways, demonstrate. And then even in your suffering, how people around you in the various spheres that you occupy, how they see you suffering. Like, so as you go, as the centrifugal force, you're going to live on mission. You're going to be on mission, right? So ministry is who you are and what you do within the body. Mission is what you do out in in the world. And so what we see in Acts 16 are really lessons in mission as we are sent out, as we go.
Yeah, that's great. And really those 4 lessons that we're going to dig into both this week and next week is the first one is contextualization, adopt methods to share the message. Number 2 is vision. God gives his people visions to accomplish his mission. Number 3, evangelism. Look for the lost so that they may be found. That one's really fun. I can't wait to dig into that one. And suffering, talking about the dark nights. Our songs in darkness shine Jesus' light for salvation. So before we dig into those, I did want to talk a little bit about this weekend. We had a couple things going on this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, both inside and outside of service. First of all, deacons. We had another 27 deacons that were commissioned.
Yeah. So it's 42 in total, and it's been decades since Northland has practiced this formal, official office of leadership in the Scriptures. And so now we have 42 men and women who are serving as these uber like elevated servants, these towel holders on steroids, is like I said this past weekend.
Why is it so important for us to have those 42 serving our body?
Well, and it's also important that we continue to find other people that God's calling to serve the body in this way, because
we can't stop at 42, right? Yeah.
Because if you think, there's so many needs in the body. I mean, we have benevolent needs in the body where people have fallen on hard times, and so they need a team that kind of not only can kind of help be the team that disseminates the money, but also it's more than just money too. Yeah. Right, so there is a element of relational and personal and spiritual care that goes along with helping people financially. So you have benevolence, you have a prayer ministry. So many of the prayer team that you will see at the end of each gathering, many of them are actually deacons. So they're there and they are trained to really receive and to hear and to pray. And if there's anything that needs to happen in terms of follow-up, they understand that. Shut-in ministries, if somebody's in the hospital and they need a meal, then you have a whole deacon kind of realm that meets those needs. And then the person of care. Yeah. So a big, huge element of our deacon body will be people as a person of care. So as we have now launched membership, every member will be assigned a person of care. So a man, a male who's a member of the church will have a male assigned to them. A female member will have a female assigned to them. And this will come from the deacon body, and they will be the person of care. That if you ever have any need, a prayer request, you're in the hospital, someone who's passed away, you've lost your job, you have a person of care that you can immediately go to. And then that person of care periodically, again, they're not going to overwhelm you, but they're going to be a point of contact too. So this person of care, well, you like the POC. The person of care will be your point of contact, and they will have these points of contact with you throughout the year. Again, not in an overwhelming way, but just connect with you and go, hey, just want to see how you're doing, checking in on you, if you have any need. So what it does, it takes a church that is big and it really tries to shrink it to someone who is truly a person of care. Yeah.
And more personal.
And more personal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and more personal. And what I hear there is it is vital as we want to continue to grow and move forward, and not just grow numerically but deeper. We have to continue to increase that capacity. Yeah. And as we increase the capacity of those that are deacons, it increases our capacity to care well, because to care for someone well takes a lot of time, energy, effort, a lot of care, intentionality.
Just to care. Here's, I would say, maybe I would just simplify it and go, to care for someone well, you need to know them. And a lot of times in church, people come in, go out.
Good. Yeah. And
they're never known. So by just having a deacon who is a person of care, now we're saying we want to know you. Now, again, we don't want to know, in some sense, we don't want to know you to a degree where you feel overwhelmed, because some people will want to be known even more than some. Yeah. Some people, just the fact that you have somebody contacting, once every, other month or something, hey, thank you for at least acknowledging that I'm here and asking about me. And some might want a little bit more. You never know. Sure. But having someone who is known really resonates in this area of care.
And that's really that's a felt need in our society. I mean, all of us obviously want to be known, so that's wonderful. The next thing that happened was we had an above and beyond update. Yeah. Why was that important for us to share that in a weekend service?
Yeah, so our above and beyond, just to kind of create clarity here, tithes fund the budget, which funds the church's mission as they participate in God's mission. So tithes, you're giving of your first fruits. That's what funds the budget. Anything outside the budget having to still do with some form of God's mission is what we call above and beyond. It's an offering. Offerings are above and beyond your normal giving. And so we did the above and beyond offering between August and December of last year. And as Pastor Derwin said, we had a goal. And I think we kind of a little overshot things, and that's okay. You do make some, adjustments or whatnot. Yeah. And so we were able to give $200,000 to Mercy Road. Now, just to be clear, too, about Mercy Road now, because some people would say, well, you gave them their own structure so that they could raise money. Well, yeah, so this $200,000 were like seed money. Yeah. So to help them get up and running, because the church had been funding and footing a lot of that bill. And so what we wanted to do was take above and beyond, take the $200,000 to really offset the cost of what we were contributing and give them, in some sense, the seed money to give them a little bit of runway as they begin to raise their own money, and to restructure things within some of those programs to make them more sustainable long term. So that $200,000 was basically seed money to get them up and running, and it was obviously incredible to see not only the seed money helping them out, but it gave them the breathing room, because in the last month and a half or so, or really I guess since the beginning of January, so almost like 2 months now, they brought in over $150,000 from outside organizations and businesses that said, man, we love what you're doing. We want to contribute. And so awesome. Really, really neat. So the model is working, but that $200,000 kind of helped them get some breathing room for that. And it's not to say that Northland, as Northland's budget, like because you and Gus oversee the missions budget, it's not like we're saying we'll never contribute to Mercy Road again. I mean, the fact that Mercy Road is part of us, that was birthed out of Northland and still very much so connected to us, we're always going to want to support them however we can. Sure. But that $200,000 was to give them the breathing room. So it's also important because in leadership, I mean, just leading with transparency, leading with honesty, because many of you heard about Above and Beyond, and maybe you asked, maybe personally, I wonder what about Above and Beyond. Sure. Hey, well, this was a lot. This gave you an update on what happened and what we saw, and then now to hopefully give you some understanding that we have not put, at least this year, we did not put capital improvements. So the HVAC units that Pastor Derwin talked about, the resurfacing and restriping of the parking lot and these internal servers, we did not put them in the budget this year. We wanted to take them out because if we would have put them in the budget, we would have had to cut places. And we're like, we don't want to cut. So we do think that we have a capacity to give above and beyond a budget. So let's just create a separate structure, meaning an offering structure of above and beyond that will ask people to give above and beyond their tithes so that we can do a little bit more this year. Yeah. Rather than cutting, we could still do everything that God put in our heart to do. Yeah,
it's wonderful. Yeah. And the last thing, I'll give the update, Serve Day. We had 229.
Nice.
Our goal was 231. I'm still trying to find a couple more.
Well, and I would have been there if I didn't fly in at 1:30 a.m. in the morning. I mean, like, Yeah.
It's interesting. There was such an energy. It was an energy that we hadn't felt at a serve day since 2019.
Okay.
It was amazing to see and feel that. So I'm confident we'll continue that energy. But we did record. We took attendance like we hadn't in the past. So I'm still trying to find maybe a couple people from rosters that I didn't know were there. So so we'll see. But yeah, 229 and the biggest crowd since 2019. So just
awesome.
Just very encouraging. And as they were coming in and signing up, we had a great problem. Like signing in, there was a line.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is a great, problem
yeah.
for myself and Bradley to kind of work through. And we had Pastor Gus and Pastor Derwin, greeting people and welcoming people.
Yeah.
And it was just a wonderful morning. So I have a question before. We have a lot of kind of introductory things, but before we get to lesson number 1, I don't want to miss the opportunity of asking you about your time in Wheaton. So this past week, you and you talked about this in the sermon. You talked about all the different types of leadership lessons that you went through. And could you imagine 9 to 5 days a week? That's a dedicated bunch. Did they know what they were signing up for?
Oh yeah, because it's an intensive. So they know that all of their class lectures are going to be given in 1 week.
Yeah.
So they knew that.
They didn't know you.
They didn't know me, but they had. According to them, they really did enjoy the week.
They had a great time.
I mean, now you could see kind of towards Wednesday afternoon and then like Thursday.
Yeah.
I mean, so you do have to adapt to certain things where you're not just overloading them with content. Because one of the things I did tell them, I said, "Listen, I could give you another lecture. I'm not. What do you want to talk about?" And I'll just give you the data dump all on the platform that we use. And so like so there was one kind of point in time where one of the leaders they have their church is 20 years old, but her and her husband were the founders.
Okay.
And so they're in some sense this fork in the road where they need to develop an org chart.
Yeah.
They have basically 6 staff members, 3 of them full time, basically 3 of them part time, and 1 of them is a lay kind of staff. And so we went through her org chart, and basically I worked, and it was kind of basically a case study.
Yeah.
Where I said, okay, tell me all of who your staff are. Full-time, part-time, tell me all of the things that you do. And so I started listing them up, and then I started seeing the problem. All right, so you got some of your full-time, in multiple, in some sense, arms of your church. I'm like, you got to get that out, because you'll never be able to scale if, in some sense, the full-time people are actually doing the same thing. And it was just so helpful for them, because here's the thing. They're going to be more passionate about listening to that at that moment than they are me giving them another lecture.
Right.
So that's a way, just even how leaders adapt, in the moment to make sure that they're as effective as they can be. So that was just a way that I did that.
That's a great lesson.
Yeah.
You answered my question without me asking it.
What was it?
It was basically, what was your favorite part of the week, and as they were consuming the material, what really stood out?
Good leaders are like Wayne Gretzky. You know what? So you know Wayne Gretzky?
I do.
The Hall of Fame hockey player.
Yeah.
You know what he says? He says he didn't skate to where the puck was, but where the puck was going to be. You see, leaders, and this is part of, this is part of leadership, is that the higher you go in leadership, the more aware that you have to be, the more, data that you're going to need, the more trends that you're going to need to see, because you're going to have to adapt your leadership to where you think things are going to be. And so I just, that's how I just was aware. I just knew where you were about to go.
I love it. So let's start with lesson number 1, contextualization. This is adopting methods to share the message. So one of the things in that section you said was that we are a regional church. So the question I have is, how is contextualization different for a regional church than for others?
Yeah, so imagine, all right, so and I'm always shocked to see how how many people we have from really the Orlando metro area. I mean, we have people that come from New Smyrna. Now, we also have a micro church in Ponce Inlet too, but we actually have people physically coming from New Smyrna, DeLand, DeBerry, Kissimmee, Apopka, and everywhere in some sense in between. So if you look, and so if you think about that wide demographic, okay, so that makes us a regional church. But if you begin to, in some sense, look intently at where these people are coming from, you're going to see that there's going to be unique context that they come from. Yeah. So then this is where you find that information on a demographic study. Right. But then also part of what we have too is a multi-ethnic church. We have over 50 nationalities, ethnicities that are represented here. Mm-hmm. You have a Spanish translation, a Portuguese translation, and we even have a plan and a desire over the next 12 months to actually launch a Spanish campus. Yep. So, because this is part of the heart language, is that if someone who primarily speaks Spanish, and maybe they speak even some broken English, if they're trying to hear a translation of the sermon, there's going to be some like in some sense pockets where they get it, pockets where they don't. Yeah. Same thing with Portuguese, and so we want to make sure that there's even an ability to just connect on a language standpoint. Okay, so imagine with Spanish and Portuguese on the connection of the language. So think about a regional church where you have people in some sense from kind of all walks of life, many different kind of pockets and demographically coming together, then you got to make sure that you have them kind of in your scope of who you're communicating to. And then regionally, there are some pockets that have a higher age in terms of like how old they are. Yeah. You'll have some pockets that are younger. So again, that's where I'm saying you have a regional church. Now, if you had a community church, like that means like in that immediate vicinity, or a house church is in some sense even smaller in terms of many times a demographic. Okay, so a regional church, when you have that many people coming together in one place as one people, you just have to be aware of making sure that when you're developing application, it can in some sense hit a broad region. That's where contextualization and being a regional church and understanding that comes into play from a contextualization standpoint.
What's fascinating about that is because of our context and because it does have to be broad, the power of the gospel is you will still, I've experienced it myself and I've heard it from others. He was preaching right to me.
Yeah.
Right? So the gospel can transcend all of that and just cut through all of that right to the heart. But it is an interesting point, and I do think that Central Florida is unique in the fact that culture-wise, not just all the different languages and cultures, but also, I mean, you're not just speaking to people from the South. I mean, in some ways, you got to go north to go south. Yeah. You're Northeast, Midwest, West.
Yeah, so
South.
Orlando, Central Florida is not Southern culture.
No.
Now, if you go more to the Panhandle in Florida, and then some people, but it is not Southern culture, which is one of the things actually. Even though I'm from the South, I don't necessarily think like a Southerner. Yeah. And the reason why I don't think like a Southerner, and I mean this with all sincerity and honesty, is that I think like a missionary. And so I came from the South and I can understand Southern context, but I think like a missionary. I really do try to think like the Apostle Paul. And so Central Florida is actually more open to different kinds of models of churches and expressions than some Southern contexts would be. And it is interesting, because in some sense it's hard to change Southern culture.
Yeah, and because
Midwestern culture too.
Yeah,
like I've been in the Midwest, and so
and the Northeast, and
now on the West Coast, a little bit more. When I say liberal, not in a political sense, but they're just more free.
Yeah,
And so open to different expressions, different methods, different models. So this is where context does play a huge role. But Central Florida is not the South. It truly is a melting pot of various kinds of subcultures coming here.
Yeah, it really is, and all of that has to play into sermon prep. It also has to play into the application, and then also the way we do ministry. Not just on the weekends, but every day. And obviously, you have the context of the suburbs playing into that. Another question we have about contextualization is, what advice would you have as people are having discussions with others that may mix the main message of the gospel with contextualization, and in this case, maybe over-contextualization?
Yeah.
What advice would you have?
So, there's two blind spots of contextualization. The first blind spot is not contextualizing. And so if you don't contextualize and you under-contextualize, then you run the risk of being irrelevant, which many churches are in that category, is that they have ceased contextualizing. Maybe it was too tiring. Maybe they didn't want to lose something in order to win someone.
Sure.
So they just under-contextualized, and so therefore they have become irrelevant. They're not able to communicate. They're not able to resonate. What they do is not relevant anymore in their context, and so that's where a lot of churches just die out. Now, here's the thing about churches dying out. They can live on life support for a very long time. As long as they pay the bills, the light bill, the power bill, they could be running 10 people and still be paying the bills, but they died a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it is this inability to contextualize ministry and mission. Now remember, so contextualization is both ministry and mission. So ministry is what you do, with the body, and the mission is what you. So you also are contextualizing both and. So if you under-contextualize either ministry or mission, it will reduce your relevancy in the context.
You have an example of how that might look today?
Yeah, one example is in some sense Sunday school. Okay, so if you and again, there are some churches that again they run Sunday school on Sunday and it works. So I'm not saying across the board. I'm just saying so here's the contextualizing principle in terms of how we think about our small group ministry life groups. Do we have some that meet on Sunday? Absolutely. On property, on campus? Yes, absolutely. Do we have groups that meet throughout the week on the campus? Absolutely. Yeah. Do we also have groups that meet in homes? Absolutely. Why? That is a contextualized way of doing small group ministry in person, on property, but also in person, off of property, because now we have opened up options. And then if you look at our model, we have learning groups, interest groups. We treat those who serve together as these function groups that do life with one another. We have an evangelistic group that serves women in the sex industry, and they treat that as a life group. So what we have done is now we have contextualized and said there are a lot of people at various stages, maybe seasons of their life, of where they need a small group, and so we've given them a plethora of options to find a life group for them, where there are some groups that say this is the only time that we're going to meet, this is where we're going to meet, and this is the only thing that we're going to do. And so everybody goes through the same whatever, or they're given us some kind of curriculum, and so it's limiting in scope. And so what we've done, again, we've again, not every church is limiting, but that's a form of contextualization where
Yeah, because the culture has changed, right?
Yeah.
So years ago, when so much of Sunday was set aside, right? People's schedules weren't filled, sports events, all of this stuff just didn't happen on Sundays the way it does now.
Yeah.
Where Sunday school worked well.
Yeah.
Right. And what I'm hearing you say is, if we continue to do it that way, it just limits the options when we know that the world has changed and people are so very busy and people's schedules are so packed that in order to win some, we need options on Monday morning,
Yeah.
and Sunday night, and Tuesday afternoon, and Wednesday afternoon, to just create opportunities for people just to engage, just to connect.
Well, when I got here, people asked me, "Are you going to keep the Saturday service?" And I said, "Why wouldn't I?" Because 92% of churches run less than 200. And, and what we are seeing, even what we're seeing now, about 350 people come on Saturday. So it's bigger than 92% of churches. Why would we cancel something that is bigger than 92% of churches? But Saturday at 5 p.m. is a contextualized, is a contextualized time.
Yeah.
Now there are some, there's some, kind of, I would say, some denominations, some churches that are more rigid in their time structure. They're going to see that the church only meets on Sunday. Now, and they're going to use that. This is what the early church did. They met on Sunday. They met on the Lord's Day, the day that Jesus rose from the dead, Sunday, the first day of the week.
Sure.
But nowhere in the New Testament are you going to see this command, you have to meet on the first day of the week. Now, you're going to see the command in the Old Testament that you're going to, you're going to honor the Sabbath. So what does seem to happen in the New Testament with Jesus' death and resurrection and the birth of the church is a transition from the ceremonial civil law to now this operation in Christ's law of freedom. So you're going to still honor the Sabbath because the Sabbath actually was worked into creation. He told Adam and Eve to take a day off. Okay? And so there should be this idea of you're taking a day off and you are spending it on worship, that you're gathering together with the saints. And so the way we look at it here at Northland is we're going to say that there is some freedom and flexibility to even the times that we meet.
Yeah.
And so we can meet on Saturday, and so we do. We meet on Saturday at 5. We meet on Sunday at 9 and 11. But when I say as we grow, are we open to having a gathering on Monday for those who are in the hospitality industry and they work on the weekends? Absolutely. Because we want to make sure that we are developing structures that do not infringe upon what we understand Scripture to be, but also make it available in terms of an option for people to do what the Scriptures say.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that with our micro churches too.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that I think all the micro churches right now are worshiping, online at 9 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah.
But conceivably, they can all gather at a Wednesday night.
They could.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is also a way and an opportunity for it to be posted online that depending on, what works in their context,
Yep.
right? What works in the Northeast, what works out West, what works in Jacksonville, wherever,
Yep.
what works for North Georgia with their program, we can really, through technology, give them that flexibility. And that's really what gets to that heart of the question when they talked about this idea of mixing the main message. And that's where you made it clear, and we want to be clear that what we can't sacrifice is the heart of the primary tenets of the gospel.
Yeah, and so you can under-contextualize, which will lead to irrelevancy.
So that's the first blind spot.
Or
Yeah.
you can over-contextualize,
Okay.
which either leads to syncretism or assimilation into culture.
So talk about those, yeah.
So syncretism is the blending. So you can look at it. I'm gonna take some of the elements of Christianity, and then I'm going to syncretize them with some elements of secularism, or some elements of you can say Buddhism, or like so you're mixing, and that can lead to some confusion.
Yes.
Okay, so in some sense, if you're trying to reach secular people, you might over contextualize by taking some of what they do and some of what Christianity teaches and mixing them together, and it brings about a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
Like so, we'll look at this passage in Acts 17 later on for Easter, where Paul, he contextualizes appropriately in understanding the context of Athens and understanding the Stoic philosophers, understanding the Epicurean philosophers. But what he's actually going to do in terms of bridging the gap, he's going to say, I understand you. In some sense, I applaud you for, in some sense, your religiosity or your spirituality.
Yeah.
But then he's actually going to begin to deconstruct their philosophy and then reconstruct it with the gospel. So he's not going to blend in the two, okay?
Yeah.
And then, so that's syncretism, and then assimilation is, in some sense, you're so over-contextualizing that you're becoming just like the people that you're trying to reach. That there's no longer any distinction between the context you're trying to reach and the church that is. And this is where danger has happened in sometimes these, you can, they're not just large churches, but these churches that are so seeker-friendly that they watered down the call of the gospel. They watered down the gospel to in some sense, make it more attractive to people. And what you do is you lose the distinction. So when you no longer talk about holiness anymore, when you no longer talk about the change that the gospel brings in your life, that all you got to do is pray a prayer and you'll be saved, well, that is actually more accommodating and assimilating to an already mediocre culture that doesn't want to be challenged to change. And so again, you have to be careful to not over contextualize the gospel. Like I'll give you a for instance. I was listening to, I won't tell you who, but because I like to listen to what other people have preached on the passage that I'm about to preach, just to see where I'm at and where they are.
Yeah.
Very few, in all honesty, very few people talk. Now, there was a lot of messages around Paul and Silas in prison, because singing through the night, that's a really, in some sense, a very easy, relevant one because a lot of people suffer. Yeah. But what I didn't find was a lot of people talking about Timothy being circumcised, Paul's vision, and then did hear some people about evangelization. But one of the guys that I listened to, all he did was read stress into the entire text. And I'm like, sure, maybe the Apostle Paul was stressed out by, going through what he did, but that isn't the impetus of that. That isn't the focus of the text. So what he did is he took something in society. People are very stressed. I get that. Of course. But he injected stress onto this particular passage that doesn't really deal with stress. Yeah. So what he did was over-contextualize something that's happening in the culture, and he injected it into a text that had nothing to do with stress. That is poor contextualization, because by doing that, he didn't even teach the text. So when somebody would ever read Acts 16 that was under that person's ministry, all they're going to think about now is, okay, this text is about stress. Yeah. No, you did a disservice when you read something into a text, where what I really do try to do is I try to understand what's the main impetus. And so I do think that there's some lessons in mission here, because he's on his second missionary journey. And so what are some of the things that we can glean? Because also you have to understand that Luke is writing in a narrative form. It's kind of more of a historical document. He's doing something. So in some sense, he's not giving what we would call prescriptive commands. Right. So there's this description that he gives of Paul. And so what you have to read now is, okay, as Paul does these things, what are some things that we can glean? Because what you would find, because if you go back to a message that I preached last year on Acts 13 and 14, guess what I talked about? I actually talked about contextualization, but I talked about contextualization from a messaging standpoint, because Paul, when he was before Jews, he would say certain things. And when he was before Gentiles, he would say certain things. But the message actually was the same, but how he communicated it was different. Yeah. So in some sense, you see Paul contextualizing ministry, and so I wanted to learn the lesson. What can we learn about his contextualizing here? Because Timothy, sucker, that poor sucker, man, he in some sense got the raw end of the deal. I mean, he's the one that had to have surgery. He's the one that has to have this recovery time, right? So
There's no sign that he disputed it, though.
No.
He went along with it.
Because he understood. He really did understand the effectiveness of if he's going to join Paul and Silas, and he knows that a strategy of Paul is to go to Jewish synagogues in these cities. He knows that it is actually going to eliminate barriers rather than create them. But then also vision. What did I do in that whole idea of vision? I showed you all of the places that it was used so that I'm not reading anything into the text about that particular vision that Paul had.
Right.
And then so what I'm doing is now I'm trying to understand the context in the larger context of the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And then now draw out of the text these lessons, but then to actually communicate them in a way that makes sense to us. So that's where we talk about in contextualization. How does that apply to us? Dress. So if you're sitting out there and you think we need to wear suits, I promise you, you get into a DeLorean, you go back to the future, Paul is not in a suit and tie. And so for anybody to claim and declare that we have to give God our best and dress up, where did that come from? It came from a certain context and place. So sure, if I'm living in the 1950s and 60s in probably Southern America, maybe even in a city, yes, I am going to dress differently.
You'd be in a suit and tie.
I would be in a suit and tie. I would do that because it's contextual. One of the things that my granddad could not get over is that I no longer had a pulpit.
Yeah.
And so, why do I need a pulpit?
Yeah.
Where does that say I need to stand behind a pulpit and declare something? So there's another context there.
Oh, it's so important that we get that right here when we're doing mission there, right?
Yeah.
Mission is from everywhere to everywhere, but because when we are doing missions overseas, and historically in the 20th century this happened, we took our dysfunction and we shipped it overseas. So we would take our context, and we got in all sorts of trouble because we did that.
Well, but in all fairness, you know why we did that?
Why?
Because of colonization.
Right.
For the history of the world. That is, and I think we talked about this on the podcast, recently.
Yeah.
But all over the world throughout history, when someone would conquer a land, they would just colonize. They would make them just like them. So we took not in a and not in a disparaging sense, but really in a what's the word I'm trying to look for? Because we didn't mean any harm by it.
Yeah.
But we did what was kind of ingrained in us, and we just took it, and basically we took a colonizing principle, and we just missionalized it and said, well, hey, this is what we do at home. You need to do it this way, and it did. It actually backfired in other contexts around the world because it wasn't in their heart language.
Sure.
Like another thing that we want to do over the next couple of years, we want to redo our auditorium because, as you have seen, we've renovated our lobby. We've painted the outside. We've put new carpet in places, and so we want to continue because this particular building is over 15 years old, so we're going to need to replace some things. But we actually where did the whole idea of auditorium type space, kind of come from? Well, it's a contextualized thing. So what we want to do is we want to actually create a space that what we would call is manipulatable. I think I just created that word, but that we can manipulate the room. But we also want to create space where you not only have, in some sense, what we would call traditional seating, but non-traditional seating, of adding some chairs, some lounge. When I say lounge chairs, not what you find on the beach, but the sofa kind of chairs.
Sure. Yeah.
Also cafe tables. And people would say, well, why would you want to do that? Well, when you go back, and again, it's not a prescriptive thing. It's more of a descriptive thing.
Yeah.
But when you go back to the early church, where did they meet? They met in basically large homes. Yeah. And so they didn't sit in an auditorium seat style. So what we want to do is when people come in, we want them to see a unique environment that is less formal, more informal, that is in some sense feels like more of an intimate space. Not like you've gathered as a spectator to watch something, but that you've gathered as a worshiper to connect to someone.
Well, and I think it's so important for us to wrestle with these ideas as we move forward, because the world has changed and it will continue to change within our context. Yep. And that's where...
I'll give you one more, because this is really important in terms of contextualization, and then we can talk about the rest in part 2.
Okay.
Take children's ministry. And it's one of the things I love about Dan Young. Is we have to contextualize our children's ministry. And then if you think about ministries, because I know that there's a debate out there in the church, well, we need to have family integrated ministries. And I understand kind of what they're saying. But also one of the things that we see with the Apostle Paul, he is very contextual to groups. Okay? So I do believe that there is fluidity and flexibility and openness to having ministries that are age appropriate to where they are. Sure. Now, one of the things that we have done too to have more of an integrative environment throughout the year is, 2, 3, 4 times a year, we have what we call family days, where the elementary and up, they come and they worship together. But when it comes to children's ministry, our philosophy is the acrostic fun. So we want to teach the children the faith. We want to teach them to understand the faith, contextualized to them. So to a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, we want to teach them the faith, but understand the faith applied to them and how old they are and where they are. And then we want to network with the parents, all in a fun environment, because here's what we know. Yeah. We know this because of the context we live in, is that when parents pick up their children, regardless of whether it's from practice or whether it's from church, what's typically one of the questions that they're always going to ask.
Did you have fun?
Did you have fun? Because we know this is that we live in a context where parents have centered their parenting around their children. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of that. Now, have there been times where Joni and I, we've in some sense, placated to that? Sure. Because it's easy. It's kind of easier parenting. Well, we're just going to give the child what they want. But what we're going to do is we're going to contextualize ministry and go, hey, if we can create a fun environment, teach them the faith, understand the faith, network with the parents on a fun environment, and little Susie, little Johnny, comes back and goes, I can't wait to go back next week. Well, then parents are more even likely to want to take their kids because they don't feel like they're having to drag them, that the kid is actually dragging them.
Yeah. Makes all the difference.
Yeah. So that's a way that contextualization works.
And this whole conversation is really helpful to remember. Read Acts 15, read Acts 16, and when we're talking about what is primary to the gospel, and then what is contextualization, it's pretty shocking to see. You talk about he's not asking Timothy to be circumcised for salvation, but for mission. Because just in Acts 15, they're talking about, it's the whole Jerusalem Council about that issue, right? So we really have to make sure there is this tightrope we have to continue to walk and balance with contextualization, because like you said, if we go one side or the other, we're gonna fall off.
This is what I mean by going deeper into the gospel. Because when you take 15 and 16, so they're drilling down, this is what we are unified around. This is the gospel.
Yeah.
Don't ask anybody else to do anything else to, in some sense, be saved or even to be sanctified, to be conformed more like Jesus. It is the gospel, right?
Yeah.
But then what James is going to ask Gentiles is, I'm going to ask you to give up something for the sake of unity.
Yeah.
Okay, so the gospel now is there's going to be times where the gospel asks me to give up something that is secondary or even tertiary in order to preserve unity in the church. And then the gospel is going to ask me to give up something in order to be more effective at winning someone.
Yeah.
And so the very thing that you didn't have to do to be saved or sanctified, Paul's asking Timothy to do in order to be effective at mission. This is why it is so important to understand the Word, to understand the gospel, to let the Word interpret itself, because you could be really confused at that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the gospel. Oh, by the way, avoid meat eaten, offered to idols. Oh, and then by the way, hey, Timothy, I need you to be circumcised. Well, you just argue. No. So this is why context is key. And what is the main impetus? What is the main focus of the passage?
Yeah.
So you're going to give up some things in order to preserve church unity because a weaker brother or sister, or even a mature brother or sister, that they don't in some sense buy into that freedom. So you have the freedom to do it, but for the sake of love, you're not going to do it. And then, like Timothy, you're going to even and so this is where I know we're already over on time, but this is good. So I know, like, let me speak to the older generation, and I don't know how many of our Oaks listens to Extra Takes.
A fair amount.
A fair amount, okay.
Probably the majority.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I understand that you grew up with a certain type of style, music, and genre that you really love, and I know it. And we want to be a diverse church, so we don't want to eliminate that style. But I know that there are times where, because you know Jesus, you love Jesus, and you truly are experienced and you are mature in your faith, that we ask Oaks to actually give up a lot in order to reach a younger generation. So let me applaud. So let me say two things. One, you are seen, you are heard, and we want to make sure that even our music, our music repertoire always has something at some point in a given month that you can resonate with, which is one of the reasons why we pivoted to even have It Is Well sung at the very end. So I want you to know that you are seen, you are heard, and you are extremely valued. But I want to also put it in context, because maybe you've never heard it this way. Because sometimes, younger pastors or, newer ministries and models, they'll just make the change without giving you the biblical warrant for it, and they'll just say, you just need to deal with it. But let me just say, like with Timothy, he's having to lose something in order to be more effective. And so when you look at some of the things that maybe you have lost over the past 30, 40, 50 years in terms of a change in ministry style, ministry method, let me just say why in some sense God in His sovereignty has asked you to make that shift. For the most part, is that by losing something, we hope and pray that we can be more effective at winning someone. Yeah. And namely a younger generation. Here's what we do know, at least from data, is that when you look at baby boomers, what you have in the generations behind is that, so the baby boomers, they're most represented in the church today, which is why the church is older, not younger. But then the Gen Xers, so they're right behind, so they have the second largest cohort in the church. Then the millennials are the third largest cohort, and guess who's the fourth? Gen Z. So basically, what we are seeing is that our churches are not able to keep up with the generational, in some sense, adaptation, which is the contextualization of reaching the generation. Wow. So I just want to applaud the Oaks and say thank you, that we are grateful for you. Like, you don't complain here. And sure, there are times where you just want us to hear you, and we do, and we hear you. But know that we value you. And what I hope and pray that you could see at least yourself in is Timothy, where Paul was asking him to do something that he didn't have to do. Right. In order to be more effective at winning someone that God deeply loved, which were the Jews.
Well said. Well said. So what we're going to do is next week we will cover those final three. So we'll cover vision, evangelism, and suffering. As we wrap up today, we'll do one final question, and that'll be about what will be coming up this next weekend for you. So we're going to be doing and for us as well, we're going to be doing a pulpit swap with the church in town here.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about that.
So when I first got here, I met various pastors in the area, and there was one pastor that I just really had a good, deep connection with, and that is Pastor Shaddy Solomon at Lake Mary Church. Yeah. And so he's just become just a dear friend of mine. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do, and I've tried this other places, is to help the people that God has given me to pastor to understand it's not just about us, that we don't have a church like building mentality, but we have a kingdom building mentality. And so to kind of show that, what would it look like for me to go preach somewhere else in the area, and then that pastor come here and preach, and so to, in some sense, show that we're on the same team, that we're not two distinct teams. And so, this coming weekend, Pastor Shaddy will preach all 3 of our services, and I will preach all 4 of their services. And so they have 4 services on a Sunday.
Okay.
And so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So Pastor Shaddy is going to come and encourage you. And because they're in their series, they're actually in their series called Ecclesia, or about the church. So I'm actually going to take a message that I preached here, the very first message of Engage, and I'm going to preach it there.
Awesome. So
that they can, understand a little bit more, and in some sense, coming behind Pastor Shaddy and saying, yes, we're on the same page when it comes to who the church is and what God has called the church to do. So I'm looking forward to it. So that's what's coming up this coming weekend.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So we're going to see the Big C Church.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And it's interesting to think about the why. Yeah. Right? It's not just to fill a weekend slot. Right. But it's for a bigger purpose.
Yeah, because here's the thing, Northland. I would much rather preach to you all. I really would. Love to. I know you. I build on, in some sense, each week, in some sense. But to be able to go into a whole nother context in the area and to encourage them, and to show that, hey, we're on the same team. So praise the Lord that you're here and growing. And then Shaddy can say the same thing. And here's what I would also say. Because it's about the kingdom and not about our kingdom, right? It's not about our little kingdom. It's about God's kingdom. If Pastor Shaddy, if you resonate more with him, and you're like, man, I really would love to sit under his teaching, by all, I'm not saying I want you to leave, but I'm saying if you're going to grow more under him, and God could, you could flourish under his leadership, I would hope and pray you would go there. And then in some sense, vice versa. Because again, it's not about our little kingdom here at Northland. It is about his kingdom. And so I am very secure in who God has made me. I wasn't years ago, but I have grown into that. So I'm very secure in who God has made me and who he is making me. Right. And I am very secure in who we are at Northland. I'm very secure in our staff and who they are and who they are becoming and how they lead. And so if people feel like they would grow more somewhere else under another church ministry, by all means go, which is why I don't take it personally when people leave. Now, again, I used to.
Right.
But I don't anymore because I want people to flourish where God has led them and called them. Now, here's what I would always say to anybody leaving a church is make sure that you leave healthy, because if you leave unhealthy and in an unhealthy manner, all you do is bring unhealthy baggage into the next place, and it will eventually be seen. So that's the only thing I would say about that.
Yeah, and I've heard you say before, your job is not to hold on to people, but to shepherd people in your care, and I think that's kind of the posture is just kind of an open hand, and it's a different thing preaching at a church in a totally different context in a totally different city, but when it's in the same city, not too same region, not too far away. I mean, within driving distance.
Yeah, it was just less than 5 miles away, I think.
Yeah. Awesome.
So
we're going to end there, and then next week we will we'll pick up and finish the next 3 lessons.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Part 2 will be next week. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.